Hey everyone, welcome to the 5th season of Travel Tales, a podcast by Afar. I'm Aislyn, and yes, I host the show. Each week on the podcast, we hear stories of life-changing travel from poets, writers, entrepreneurs, authors, and so many more. And this season, we'll be sharing short Q&As inspired by each episode that you can only find here. This is Travel Tales. I'm Aislyn Greene, and this is Travel Tales by Afar. Every week, we hear stories of life-changing travel from poets, scientists, authors, entrepreneurs, and so many more. And this week, I interview a filmmaker who cycled across the United States without any food or money. His name is Daniel Troia. In 2018, he embarked on what he thought would be a 3-month journey. He'd been feeling very disillusioned over the division in the United States and wanted to do something that felt unifying. So he decided to ride his bike from California to New York, relying solely on the kindness of strangers. He learned how to panhandle, outran tornadoes, and made lasting friendships along the way. And he filmed it all, which he then turned into a fantastic documentary called We're All in This Together. You can watch it on Amazon Prime and Apple TV. The film reveals the twists and turns of his journey, and there are many, and this idea that we really are all in this together. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. We're here today to talk about We're All in This Together, this fantastic documentary you did. It's such an ambitious project. You started in California, cycled all the way to New York City, and then came back west. Why did you take on such a challenge?
Just like a lot of other Americans, I've been feeling all the tension and division in the country in the last couple of years. And honestly, it was causing some anger. I was feeling a lot of anger about how divided it seems that we are. And in some ways, I wanted to be able to channel that anger and try to create something positive. So I thought, man, I would love to travel across the country and really get to know people in a unique way. So I thought, well, what if I were to ride my bicycle across the country? Because that would give me a unique perspective of, the different communities that I ride through and the people that I meet. And then I came up with the idea of, well, what if I were to do it with no food or money? Because then I could have a sign with me that said, biking across country, ran out of food, anything helps. And that could create some really unique conversations with people. And then again, really get to know the people. I wanted to create something that would show, humanity in a positive way instead of just all the negativity that we see in the news.
And it is I think it's a film that really, when you're in a dark place, this is a good one to watch. It's just very heartwarming and just amazing the amount of people who opened up to you, who shared with you, who welcomed you into their homes. I mean, were you nervous about embarking on something like this without food or money?
Yeah, I was nervous, but what there was is both of my parents passed away a couple years before doing this, and in some ways,
wow, I'm sorry.
Thank you. But in some ways, it created a sense of recklessness in me, but in a really good way. So once they passed, I really started questioning a lot of things with my own life, and I knew that I wanted to do something challenging and really push myself. So I kind of, using the word channeled, I channeled that grief that I was experiencing and wanted to create something. So I was nervous for sure, but I read a book on dumpster diving before I left, and I knew that dumpster diving was going to be a backup option for me if I couldn't get enough food or money. And once I hit the road and I started going behind grocery stores, I had no idea that there was that much food being thrown away.
It's horrifying. I was horrified by the perfectly good, the bananas, the bread.
It's a huge issue in our country. We throw away almost 30% of the food that's produced in our country, which was just absolutely insane.
But you knew that you had that as kind of okay, if I can't get something today from someone, then I can go to the grocery store and shop.
Yeah. And I also, I always like to acknowledge I was very privileged to go on this, this journey in the first place. I knew that my sign was unique because it said biking across country. And so I knew that I was going to attract a certain amount of people that way. And also the fact that when you are on a bike tour and you have your bike with all your bags, etc., it attracts a lot of curiosity from the people that you meet. And so that was also another advantage I had. I knew that people were going to be like, man, you look like you've been on a journey. Where are you coming from? And so it opened up a lot of opportunities for conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were people who were definitely travelers or, wanting to support travelers. And, this really felt like a pilgrimage in that way, not just a trip, but like truly a pilgrimage to learn something about yourself and about the outside world. And I was curious what your goal setting out was, and then if it changed along the way, or your intention maybe.
Yeah, so the original goal was like, I thought, man, I want to make a, documentary about like kindness, for example. And I wanted to show some nice things that are happening. But as time went on, I started riding through impoverished neighborhoods, and I started to notice that the people who were struggling the most, and who faced the most adversity in their lives, they were the ones that were most willing to give, right? And so what I was doing is I would ask someone if they helped me. I'd say, do you have a story about when somebody helped you when you really needed it? And I started to notice that in those impoverished neighborhoods, those were the people who were the most willing to give, and they had the most unique stories, right?
Yeah.
And so as time went on, I started to realize that my experience was showing that a lot of us have the same human experiences in life as far as, people were sharing stories about grief, loved ones they've lost. And I would go through these neighborhoods where maybe someone grew up in a totally different environment and grew up in a different culture, but after talking with these people, they would share their stories about shared experiences that I had with them, right? And so I kind of took a detour on the film and started to go in the direction of focusing on the theme of togetherness.
I was so touched by the people that you showcased, like the little girl at the beginning. There were several people who were homeless themselves and jobless who gave you money. People who had immigrated to the country or run into the hard times, like you're saying. Mama Starfish, I loved her story. What do you think was that thread that connected all of them?
I think what it was is I noticed after spending 7 months on the road that it seemed, that the people who had pain in their heart, it seemed like they were trying to, again, kind of similar to what I was doing, they were trying to channel that and do something kind for somebody. For example, the first person who was living on the streets, that offered me help, I initially denied it. I said, no, I can't take this money from you. And they said, by you denying this money, you're denying me the opportunity to do good. And the person said, I gain a lot of good from doing something kind for you. So I think that's part of the reason why there were, it attracted unhoused people, et cetera, because they were trying to uplift themselves by helping somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe it was a little girl who had said, like giving makes me feel good.
Exactly.
And so we should all have that experience, right? No matter our living circumstances.
Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned your appearance and, the fact that you had this unique sign, a unique look. And you also mentioned that your skin color at one point, that you wondered what this would be like if you were Black. So I appreciated that you're acknowledging that, as a white man, there's a different experience there for you. But then as the film went on, as time went on and you grew out your beard and your hair, you started to notice that people treated you differently. And I was just curious to know what that was like, that kind of evolution.
Yeah. So just a quick story. I met a man when I was biking, and I was in Virginia at that point of the journey, and it was a Black man who was biking towards California, and we were sharing stories about our experience. And he said, "Where are you sleeping most nights?" And I said, "Most nights I sleep like in a baseball field, And he said, "The cops don't bother you?" And I said, "Usually they just tell me to leave early in the morning." And then he looked at me, he said, "Last week I was staying in a campground where I was supposed to be staying, and someone still called the cops on me." So that's why I think it was important, because my experience, if I wasn't a white man, it would have been totally different. But yeah, going back to what you were saying as far as, my beard started to grow longer, and it definitely, without a question, was pushing people away. And it was I had a feeling that my appearance was going to change the way that people treated me, but this was very, very obvious. I was getting yelled at a lot more. What probably the most obvious thing for me was I was getting asked to leave grocery store parking lots way more often once I had the long beard. But there was also a sense of, the lifestyle that I was living was, trying to find a safe place to sleep at night, and trying to find a place to bathe, and then trying to get enough food or money for the day. And so that lifestyle after 7 months was really starting to wear on me. So I was putting out a much different energy by the end of the journey. And when I first started, I feel like I was welcoming people because I was energetic and I was feeling strong. But after 7 months, my energy was actually pushing people away. So the combination of the lifestyle, which was bringing me down, and my appearance, so both those things were really pushing people away, and I was receiving much less help at that point.
It sounded like you didn't expect that it would take you 7 months to complete it. How long did you think it would take?
Yeah, because originally I was planning on only doing 3 months. I was planning on just riding to New York City, and then, I got to New York City, and there was just this feeling of like, man, it's just, I need to keep going because there's something that's missing, right? And what I think what it was is, because immediately, once I left New York City and started heading back towards California, everything just got way more challenging for me. And because I was receiving less help, when I would receive help, those interactions with those people was becoming so much more meaningful. And I think that's what I needed to go through. I needed to go through the moments of being treated differently because of my appearance, etc., because that just kind of gave me a new understanding of empathy and compassion, and also my judgments of people who look a certain way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like the first 3 months, you could almost just be carried by your adrenaline and your excitement.
Yes.
But then you're really getting into kind of the slog of it.
Exactly.
And things changing and the weather changing. You're battling that too. So
yeah, and I think with most things in life, right, it's like we learn the most when we're struggling, I think.
Yeah.
Right? When life is good and we're winning, like, there's not so many lessons there, but it's, the true growth is when we're really going through challenging times. And the really beautiful thing is if we can come out of those challenging times, we just get so much stronger.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And you kind of reflected on this is something that you'll kind of leave behind. Like you had someplace to go where you could change your circumstances. But if that wasn't so available to you, what does that do to your spirit over time?
Exactly. Yeah. And again, I can't stress enough. Because there was some dangerous situations when I was camping. There was one night when I was camping just outside of New York City, and I was sleeping behind this warehouse, and this truck came up to my tent at 3 a.m. and I literally thought I was going to die that night. And I just think that for people who are living on the streets, I'm sure that happens fairly often, to where, you wake up and somebody's there, and it's super traumatizing. And I think that you can't help but carry that weight on your shoulders. And unfortunately, it seems like that pushes you. You need help even more at that point. But because your energy is different, it pushes people away even more.
And then just the sheer fact of not being well rested, that takes a toll too.
That's a really great point, because when you are, I call it stealth camping, you're sleeping in public places. And I never, trespassed or left any trash or anything, but I was sleeping in places I shouldn't have been. But you don't fully fall asleep. You're kind of on edge, especially after that night behind the warehouse. I definitely didn't feel rested.
I can imagine. Yeah, that was intense. There were a couple of moments. That one, it was the most visceral, but there was the time where you were trying to get ahead of the tornadoes in Kansas, where it seemed like you were in some, potential danger.
What's funny about that, though, is when I'm on a bike tour, I love to just be truly in it. And I was in Kansas, and I was at a gas station, and a tornado warning went off, and I thought, oh man, I better hit the road. And I turned around, and I saw this massive storm that was coming my way. And then I felt a huge sense of adrenaline. And honestly, in that moment, I was absolutely loving it, because it felt like, man, this is a real adventure. And thankfully, I was able to outrun that storm. But a tornado did touch down in the town behind me. Thankfully, it didn't cause any damage. It just touched down in a field. But I definitely could feel the power of that storm.
It was beautiful footage, too.
Thank you.
Knowing that you were okay.
Yeah.
Were there ever times that you wanted to give up?
There was a couple. So in the very beginning, when I was crossing the Great Basin Desert, there was this 400-mile stretch of desert, and there was only 4 towns. And there was one particular day where there was 84 miles, no services, 3 mountain passes, and no shade. And on that particular day in the desert, I ran out of water about 35 miles away from the last town. And at that point, I was getting a little nervous, the fact that I started, I still had a good ways to go. And then this huge headwind came towards me, and so it was really slowing my pace down. And then on top of that, I was getting so dehydrated that my nose started just gushing blood. And at that point, I started getting nervous, like, oh man, this isn't good, because I'm losing so many electrolytes right now. And I guess the cherry on top was, on this long stretch of desert highway, it was littered with just like dead animals that just succumb to the desert,
God.
the heat of the desert.
No.
That's what I'm seeing as I'm like out of water and super thirsty. I'm just seeing dead animals and I'm thinking, this is not a good sign.
Yeah, you're like, don't read into this. Don't read into this.
Yes, yeah. So that was one time when I felt like I questioned what I was doing, especially because it was like the second week of being on the road, and I thought, did I bite off a little more than I can chew? But thankfully I made it through that. But I would say the other one that comes to mind is it was about 6 months into the trip. I ended up being on the road for 7, and as I mentioned, at this point I was feeling so beat up because there was this 3-night stretch in Montana where it was 13 degrees each night, and I only had summer gear with me because I wasn't expecting to be on the road that long. Yeah, and so I was literally wearing every piece of clothing that I had when I went to bed at night, and those 3 really, really cold nights, like, it sucked the strength out of me. And so at this point, the last month of the journey on the way back to California, I was feeling so physically weak and also mentally weak because of the lifestyle. And one particular day, I felt like I was really close to quitting. I remember calling a physical therapist that I worked with before I left and saying, "Hey, I think I'm done. I don't think I can finish." And it was actually the day after I called her. I was sitting on the side of the road and my sign was not out. I didn't need any food or anything, and people were walking past me, and I was just trying to stretch my body because I was in so much pain. And this man walks up to me and he says, "Hey man, are you okay?" I said, yeah, just my body hurts a little bit. And he goes, "Hang out right here. I'll be right back." And this man, he runs across the street to a grocery store, and then he comes back with a bag of groceries. And again, I wasn't asking for anything, right? And what he did was he bought me a bag of groceries with his food stamps. His name was Gary. He was living on the street, so he was unhoused.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, and what was really interesting about that is he could feel the energy I was putting out, and I think that he recognized that I was really going through a rough time because he faced a lot of hardships in his life. And it was really interesting that everybody else was walking by and they couldn't pick up on the energy, but he picked up on it. Right? And he helped me. And what it wasn't about the food that he gave me, but he gave me a hug. And the fact that he saw me as a human being that needed help in that moment, that was life-changing. And honestly, that's what gave me the strength for that last month of writing. I just felt like after meeting him, it was so energizing and inspiring. And he changed my life.
Yeah, wow. I imagine he would be harder to find, but have you stayed in touch with any of the people that you met or stayed with?
Yeah, so the majority of the people that I did meet, I stayed in contact with. Unfortunately, Gary, because he was unhoused, it's been really difficult. I wasn't able to keep in contact with him ever again. But the majority of the people, yeah, definitely I keep in contact with them.
Oh, that's so cool. What did they think about the film?
Oh, they're so happy that they showed up in the movie, because for them, I was wearing camera glasses when I was panhandling because I didn't want people to know in the moment that I was making a documentary, right? And so they were just doing a kind act, and the fact that their kind act happened to be captured by my hidden camera glasses, once I told them, "Hey, I'm actually making a documentary," they were stoked. They're like, "Oh, cool," "Oh, I'd love to be in the film," because it shows them in a really positive light.
I'm just thinking a little bit about Gary too, and this idea of him, because of his own struggles, being able to recognize when someone is not in a great place. And has that changed the way that you treat people that you encounter in all walks of life since then?
Great question. Yeah, totally. And I think before going on this journey, it's like I would notice sometimes when a coworker or a friend, was having like an off day or a rough day, but I felt uncomfortable about saying anything about it, And after meeting, hundreds of people I was so fortunate they showed up into my life that now when I'm aware that someone's having a rough day, I just check in, I just check in, whether it's my coworkers or even sometimes people at a store. I just let them know that they're seen and just ask how they're doing. And I think because there were times when, especially towards the end, when I was feeling not so great, even if somebody didn't have anything to give me, if they just kind of smiled and said, "Have a nice day," like that really mattered, because I felt like they saw me and acknowledged me as a person. And I think that the really special thing with our lives is every day, like we all have this like extremely special opportunity to show up for somebody. I'm not talking about giving food or money. It's about, the idea, again, if you see someone's having an off day, just letting them know they're seen and checking in with them, and it can literally change their lives.
What was it like to be totally reliant on strangers? I mean, I know you had the ability to dumpster dive too, but you were very much dependent on the goodwill of others.
Yeah, there was a lot of shame involved in it. And I did it for 7 months. Yeah. And even after 7 months holding my sign, I never got comfortable holding a sign out there. And again, I was super privileged to be able to do this. It makes me think about someone who doesn't have a choice and has to stand out there every day. I mean, you get a lot of looks from people and people yell things, and it's not a great feeling. And for me, I was fortunate that it did open up some beautiful interactions with people, because I would ask them, do you have a story about when somebody helped you when you really needed it? But I would say that there was definitely a lot of guilt and shame while I was doing it.
And interesting that you were never relieved of that.
Yeah, that's why I prefer dumpster diving, honestly, because I was able to get my food that way, and I didn't feel like I was bothering people or being a nuisance to their community, etc.
Would you say that most people who saw your sign were positive towards you, or was it really like the people we're seeing in the film were the rare exceptions?
Yeah, I think, again, because of my privilege and my sign was unique about I was a traveler, right? And so majority of people different. Yeah, it's different. And the sad reality is if my sign just said hungry, then I don't think I would have received as much help.
Yeah.
But again, people came up to me because they're like, "Oh, so what's your story, man?" And I tell them my story, I'm biking across the country, and then maybe they were a little bit more willing to give. But again, the whole reason, I did this is I wanted to connect with people, and I thought this will create a unique way of connecting with people in the communities that I ride through.
Yeah. And you showed so many diverse communities, right? Like the guys with the pride flag. Was that in Appalachia?
That was actually just outside. So that was near State College.
I see.
Yeah, but I was riding through the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah, and that was a really beautiful experience to meet people that were because their whole thing was with that flag. It was, for them, it represented togetherness. And they said, we want to represent this house is a safe place for people. And what's really, really, really crazy is 3 weeks later, I was hitchhiking, and we were 5 hours away from State College, right? And the person who I caught a ride with was going to that exact same town, State College. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is the place where 3 weeks earlier, this person said you always have a safe place to sleep here. And I just happened to get dropped off right there.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Did you feel like there was some, I don't know what your spiritual beliefs are, but some sense of kind of providence or a guiding hand that helped you in those darkest moments or guided you on your journey?
Yeah, I do think there were some serendipitous moments. And for example, when I was in Arcata in the Redwoods in Northern California, I woke up that morning in the Redwoods, and I remember saying out loud, something special is going to happen today. And I don't usually say those kind of things, but it was just a really strong feeling that I had. And then, later that day, it was the last person who appeared in the film. It was Tom. Tom was an unhoused man. He was living on the streets, right? And he makes cartoons about kindness, compassion, and love. And he's so passionate about helping the poor. And he came up to me, and he gave me a couple $2 for lunch, and we shared a really wonderful hug, and I'm so grateful that I talk to him every Sunday.
Oh my gosh, how cool.
Since then, yeah. But that's an example of a moment where it was this real strong feeling of I can just tell something really special is going to happen.
He had really great energy, even through the laptop screen. He had the kindest eyes.
He really is. I don't use this word often, but he's pretty much like an angel. I
got that vibe from him, for sure.
He really is. I went to visit him a year ago, and he said, "Do you mind if we go to the grocery store really quick?" And I said, "Yeah." And again, he's still unhoused, right? And so we go to the grocery store, and he buys 2 loaves of bread, and then he says, "Okay, can we drive over here?" And he goes to a homeless encampment, and he drops off the food for other homeless people.
Wow. Would you do this again?
It was such a life-changing experience, but I would say no because of the mental strain it had on me. I did feel slightly traumatized after some of those nights of sleeping out. And again, I'm grateful for those moments because now it's changed my perspective on how extremely difficult it is for people who are actually living on the streets. The physical aspect, I loved that. I love that whole adventure of it. But the mental, it was just, because again, that lifestyle of trying to find a place to sleep and bathe and food and all of that, it was pretty straining on me. And when I got home, my friends and family were concerned because I definitely took me a little while to bounce back from that whole experience because it was 7 months of constantly on the go, and it was just really, really overstimulating at times. And but I'm so grateful for it.
What do you think that you learned about yourself through this?
About myself. I think that we are so much more capable than we may believe. Because there was so many moments on that trip that I thought like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. I mean, for example, there was, climbing over 11,000 foot mountain passes in Montana when a snowstorm is coming, oh my God. There was moments like that. Or even I remember when I was crossing the desert, or even something as simple as just 35 mile per hour headwinds and trying to get across Kansas when every day is like that, just thinking like, I don't know if I can cross this state. Like, it's just too windy.
Yeah.
Right? And then it just, if you just stay consistent and take baby steps, eventually you'll start making progress.
What was your kind of main takeaway in terms of our shared humanity or the state of the United States?
I think we're not nearly as divided as it seems. And the reason I say that is, like the media, they all have their agendas, and there's that phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, right?
Yeah.
And so they start with the worst news stories they can find because that gets the most viewers, etc. But the thing is I was fortunate to go into these communities and talk face to face with a lot of people who were different than me, right? And had different political beliefs. But the fact that we were speaking in person, there was way more respect between each other. Nowadays, people are communicating in person way less. I mean, if you think about it, I remember when you'd be at the bank 15 years ago and no one had a cell phone or a smartphone. Yeah. So sometimes you would just talk to the person next to you, right? Or when you're at the grocery store or when you're in the doctor's office. But now everybody has their phones and we're all kind of just like sucked into them, and we're not having those small interactions like we used to have. And I think that's adding up and making us feel more divided. But, when you do have the opportunity to speak to somebody who has a different point of view in person, usually it's way more respectful. And I think that you have more understanding of where they're coming from and more respect. And so that's what this experience taught me.
What do you hope that viewers will take away from it?
I would love it if people watch the film and just feel like treating each other better. And again, it's those small things. I mean, there's so many things that are out of our control right now and are so overwhelming in the world. But one of the things that we actually can control is how we treat each other.
You embarked on this adventure and it helped you see these things, help you make these connections with people and really kind of embody it. How do you think that we can hold on to that connection without spending 7 months cycling from coast to coast and back?
Yeah, I honestly think we need to be more mindful of our day-to-day, connections. So let's be mindful of each other and not forget that we're all living this shared experience together, right?
Yeah.
And I think that would really help things, because some of the things are out of our control. When you do something kind for someone, or even just giving someone a compliment, it can totally change not just their day, but their week, right? And the beautiful thing, that doesn't take any money. We can all do that. I think that most people definitely want to do good in the world. I really believe that, because we have to. We have to stick together. That's the only way that we're going to make it. As a human race, right? We got to stick together.
Well, thank you for putting something so positive out into the world. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure.
That was Daniel Troia. It's such an inspiring journey, and this summer he's showing the film in different cities across the United States and donating half of all the ticket sales to the local homeless shelters in each city he visits. The first screening was on June 23rd in Sacramento. You can learn more about when the film is coming to your city at weareallinthistogetherthemovie.com. We'll link to the website as well as to the film in the show notes, along with Daniel's social media handles. And next week on July 4th, we're replaying one of our favorite travel tales of all time, featuring the illustrious comedian Michelle Buteau.
Pierre and Etienne became our vacation boyfriends that week. We'd hold hands and ride bikes and whisper sweet nothings into each other's ear. When we were getting ready to leave, we realized that we were going to miss each other. We're like, we have to see each other again, This could be true love. And this was before MySpace and Facebook, so truly the only way to stay in touch with someone was by writing a letter and then strapping that letter to a pigeon or a three-eyed raven. Those were your choices. And so when Cynthia and I came back from Spain, we just looked at each other and we're like, are those our French boyfriends? Are we going to have French citizenship? Are we going to move to Paris and figure out how to make bread and just, ride the metro with a little baguette under our arms? Like, who are we going to be?
Ready for more travel tales? Visit afar.com/podcast and be sure to follow us on Instagram and X. We're at Afar Media. If you enjoyed today's exploration, I hope you'll come back for more great stories. Subscribing makes this so easy. You can find Travel Tales by Afar on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to rate and review the show. It helps other travelers find it. This has been Travel Tales, a production of Afar Media. The podcast is produced by Aislyn Greene and Nikki Galteland. Music composed and produced by Strike Audio. Everyone has a travel tale. What's yours? Okay, that was our show. I'll include a link to the full episode below, and please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out.